Hi, this is my review for Fighting Formations, Grossdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division. The game design is by the late Chad Jensen, and this was published in 2011 from GMT Games. My version is the second edition version. So if we have a look at the back of the box, complexity is 6 out of 9 on the complexity meter, which I would agree with. Solitaire suitability is pretty much in the middle at 5. I would agree with that. I've played this game extensively solo and enjoyed it incredibly, which I'll talk a little bit about. Things that are worth noting: there's an awful lot of content in the game. You get 4 large maps. There are some scenarios that use some of the smaller maps, half-size maps, and I think there's a couple of scenarios that use, well, there's definitely a couple of scenarios that use double maps as well, which is great. Loads of counters, 5 sheets of those, player aids. There are some cards in the game. You get a rule book and a playbook. The rule book is 24 pages, we'll have a look at that in a second. And different dice, which I'll also talk a little bit about. This is a platoon scale game, and I'll talk more about that. Key thing here is that the map squares are 75 meters per hex, to give you some relativeness to that. So Combat Commander, I think, is 30 meters per hex, so the hex sizes in the game world are sort of as big and half again bigger. ASL, I think, is 40 meters per hex. This is 75 meters per hex. So first up, the rulebook. This is version 1.1. The rulebook has a layout, or an order, I should call it actually, that basically puts the core mechanics first. So it talks about how you use command markers, stacking, etc. And then it goes through the sequence of play. So the order of the rulebook, I think some people looking at people's comments struggle a little with. It just takes a few different, it takes a few readings, and like a lot of games, I'd recommend either watching how to play videos, or simply getting a few counters out and running through the rulebook with those. I've had this game a long time. I don't really remember struggling too much with the rulebook myself, but I would have done what I'd normally do, is just taken some counters out and just gone through how combat works, how activation works, and those things are quite unique in this game. I'll talk more about them. I generally found, and then you kind of get to the core rules around about page 17, which are the orders, and that's a key component of this game, which I'll talk more about. I found the rulebook very well written. I would say it's not the most introductory to someone new to the system, so it's going to take several readings and a little bit of backwards and forwards when you actually start playing the game. But what I would say is that it is very nicely written, very clear. I didn't have, once you understand how the system works, I generally found I didn't need to refer to the rulebook that many times. But yeah, very nicely written, very spacious, has sort of a breadth to it, which is great. Very nice. Then you also get a playbook, which is great. This is great. So the playbook talks about specific rules to this game in the system. I have this core game and I have the expansion to it, but the rule book is for the rules of fighting formations, not specific to this game in the series, if that makes sense. That's where the some of these exclusive rules come in, especially around the different types of terrain types. For example, how passengers work in the game, smoke. It goes through all the assets. The assets are cards. I'll talk a little bit about those. They had quite a lot. Optional rules. I've used some of these in my games, which I've enjoyed very much. And then we get into the scenarios. There's an introductory scenario, scenario 0. There are a lot of scenarios in the game, and there's a great variety of size of scenarios. So actually scenario 2 is one of the slightly bigger scenarios in terms of the amount of counters for the game that you're going to be playing with. But there are different sizes. They've all got historic reference to them. And this game has a great historical flavour to it that I really enjoyed. I can't recall how many scenarios there are now. We'll go through, flip through. There's an awful lot. I've played all the scenarios multiple times, played them all solo, enjoyed them immensely. 10 different scenarios in the core game, and for example scenario 10, there's a lot less counters than there were on scenario 2, for example. The scenarios have been are really good, really good, really well thought through, play extremely well. You get a great section on the order of battle, so if you're interested in this in this division in history, this is awesome. It's very well researched. Great historical notes, absolutely great. Excuse me. And then brilliant example of play that I enjoyed reading immensely and going through. And I can remember playing this for the first time and basically recreating this example of play to help me understand the mechanics. It's extremely well done, extremely thorough, as you can see. It really did help understand the core mechanics of the game, and they go through every single of the core mechanics, every single one, which is awesome. I thought this was a brilliant sources and suggested reading section. So I'm just looking at that again to see if there's any books on here I don't have. It's great. This is awesome. Really well put together, very extensive, very complete. For me, a real gem to be included in this game. So let's have a look at some of the components of the game. This is a game that I've got set up really for this video. This is one of the smaller maps, and I just picked a smaller map because it's easier to frame it on the camera. This is like a half-size map, so there are, like I said, there are some scenarios that you play on a smaller map. Most of them are played on a map sort of double this size, and some are even played on 2 maps, so 4 times this size, which are great, a lot of fun. But obviously they do take a lot longer to play. The readability of the maps is really high. It's very clear what the hex contents are for the map, which is great. Personally, I really like this visual style from GMT. It obviously is a similar sort of visual style to Combat Commander. That's really the only thing this game has in common, apart from they're designed by the same gentleman. But the maps are great. The artwork on the counters is, again, it's great. I'm just going to zoom in and we'll have a look at those. So as I said, yeah, the artwork on the counters are great. All the armour has illustrations on them. Same with the infantry. They give a great flavour to the game. The counters themselves have all the information that you need by and large to play the game. What is interesting with this game is that when you activate a counter, and I'll talk a bit about how you do that, you flip it over to its activated side, which has a wiped bar along the top. So it's not like some games where you're flipping counters, turn them over to show step losses or anything like that. This is to show they're activated. The orientation of the counter for the armour in the hex is important. As you can see from these examples, this stub counter is a different physical shape to the infantry, which I thought was neat. The counter information, if it has 3 dots, it's a platoon size. If it's a single dot, it's a squad size. So for example, here we've got Grenadier Squad. It has three dots to represent that's a platoon. That means it's worth the same as 3 squads. So there's a Grenadier Squad, which only has one dot, 1 pip on it. This is a platoon scale game, so for the most part you'll be playing counters that represent a platoon, which in this game is 3 squads, or the counters represent a squad. So if, for example, it's usual to find platoons fighting against squads or alongside squads as well. That means that the scale of this game is different than your normal squad-based game, because the hexes, as I mentioned, represent about 75 meters, and you could have several platoons, but say for a platoon, so that's representing roughly 3 squads. Let's say an average of squad is 10 men, 30 men in your hex for 1 counter, for example. And I would say maybe because of the nature of the artwork only representing, 1 soldier, for example, or 1 tank, you could look at the visuals of this game and think this is a squad-based game, and whilst it has squads in it, this is a platoon scaled game, and that is a really key important thing. So even on a small game like this one, so just zoomed out, just as I was saying, even on a scale like this, and this is quite a small setup game within this system, the amount of counters might seem familiar to a squad-based tactical game, but because this is platoon scale, it plays quite differently in many ways, and there's more sense of attrition, I would say. The length of play for this game is generally longer, so you could comfortably play this sort of scale with this size map counters in an evening, but some of the larger games, maybe 2 evenings or something like that. And like I said, the visuals of the counters maybe are a little bit misrepresentative of that. So, counters that show 1 tank, this is not 1 tank on the counter, it's a platoon of tanks, platoon of grenadiers. That would be 30 men, for example, or more. So when you're thinking about whether you want to invest in this game, platoon level, not squad level, though there are squad counters in the game. In the expansion, I will say, without checking it, tends to be the games tend to be a bit smaller. But the base game of fighting formations, the maps are, you're playing on large maps with lots of counters, which I really, 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 really enjoy, that scale, that sense of scale. And I enjoy, obviously, squad-based tactical games as well, but this just has an epic feel to it, as you're imagining. For example, we've got some grenadiers up here across this field. In my mind's eye, when I'm playing this game, I'm imagining the sequences take an event. I know that there's, multiple squads here with MG34s. There's a couple of squads here of grenadiers racing across that stubble field towards the Russian employments. They're full of Russians, as they've got multiple platoons in there as well. So it's got a more epic, grand scale in the play, which I really enjoy. I've got quite a few platoon scale games, and this is definitely one of my favourites, if not my favourite. So the other thing I want to talk about is the order matrix. This is one of the key differentiators. If I had to pick one thing this game does differently than any other game I've ever played, it's this one thing. And I'll try and describe it as best I can. There are other YouTube videos that describe it way better than I can do. Basically, if this is the German track and this is the Soviet track, if the pawn is in my track, in the German track, that means there's a German player. I can give my counters an order. The cost of those orders depends on which order I would like to give them, and that is different per side. So if I want to give back to my earlier example about my Grenadiers rushing across that stubble field, if I want to give them a move, I take the cube away from the move section here, which is 3 cost, and I move that pawn 1, 2, 3 towards my opponent. It's still in my area, so I can get another go, for example. That's it in a nutshell. There's more levels of sophistication than that. In this example here, I've got all the cubes sort of nicely stacked up. Sometimes you roll in some of the scenarios as to where the cubes go. Interestingly, the Germans, it costs 3 to move. For the Soviet player, only costs 2. Conversely, it only costs 2 for the Germans to fire. For the Soviet player, it costs 3. Generally speaking, as a player, I want to make the best decisions to keep this pawn in my side so I can keep activating and giving my units orders. There will be a point where I will know by giving them an order it's going to put that pawn over into the Soviet side, and the Soviet player will then be able to start giving his units orders. I've never played a game that uses this similar mechanic, and I find it utterly brilliant. I also think it lends itself well to a solo game. This is not a solitaire game in the sense that there's a bot or a game to play against. You're playing both sides, but because of the way that pawn works, it's very clear when you switch side when you're playing solo. And I love this mechanic. It is different, and therefore when you first start to learn to play this game, it will take you a little while to get your head around. But like I said, there are really good tutorial videos on YouTube. I think Blast Pop has one that just demonstrates that way better than I just did of how it works. So yeah, you should definitely watch them, check them out. The other component that I really love about this game is how combat works. Combat is basically 2d10, unless you're really close to the enemy, and then you're rolling 2d12. If you're really far away from the enemy, you roll 2d8. In a nutshell, and you need the same number regardless. So if you are, let's say this Grenadier is firing at this rifle unit, and that Soviet rifle unit was there, I'll be rolling 2d10. I would add that to my combat value. That would give me a sum. Then the Soviet player would roll 2d10, add that to their sort of defense morale value. That would give them a sum. If that's higher than that, that counter gets a randomly pulled damage chit. For example, let's pull one. Here we go. And it's infantry, so they are shaken. If they get 2 of those, then that is reduced from a platoon down into a squad, so it takes a casualty. In essence, that's how combat works. If I was closer, say for example there, I'm right next in the hex next door, then I would roll 2d12. That would give me my sum, added that to my firepower. They would only roll 2d10 and add that to their defense, so I'm obviously at a statistical advantage. And it's a brilliant system. It just works so well. There's no real charts you need to look up. It's just effortless, and it gives a really good, interesting tactical play in your gameplay. Conversely, in that example, obviously I'm right next door to them, so when they return fire, which they're able to do providing they're not spent, they're going to be rolling 2d12 against me. So how it works in reality, I think you want to try and reduce platoons down, certainly get a damage token, a counter on them, and try and finish them in close combat. Close combat is particularly, as you would expect, particularly deadly for this era of history. It's just a really great system. I can't say how much I love it, and it's great because it's so streamlined, and it has that physical sense of, oh, I'm swapping the dice now. Sometimes your dice degrade, and it uses the same dice upgrading, degrading system for other components such as morale, when you're trying to rally your troops. It just works really, really, really well, and it's a lot of fun. I love pulling the damage chick counters, which you pull blind to. You never know what's going to happen, and especially, say for example, this counter here has got a damage chick counter. It's a Grenadier Squad, and it has a chick counter with an F, which means it can't fire. So you want to rally that squad to get that chick counter off, but also it can't fire at the minute. So, and that's just that was blindly pulled. So you're never really sure what you're going to get when you pull those damage counters. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of the mechanics, the core mechanics, are around how you do the command. So we've seen how you give your counters an order. What you have is these command tokens here, or command counters, sorry. They're an abstract reflection of your commanders. Each nation, depending on the scenario, they have a radius. So for example, in this scenario, this radius of this counter is 3 hexes. So when I activate this and give it an order, any of my units within 3 hexes, so this one, and this one, can receive that order at a cost of 0. So going back to that pawn marker, moving across, it's 0 to do that. Conversely, you'll find in the game that will be flipped over to 1, so works exactly the same way, but now I have to move the pawn marker towards my opponent for 1 for every unit that I give that order to, and there are times when this won't be on the map and they're costing a lot more to give that activation, that order to. Again, it's just a really simple, it is slightly abstract, but it's a really simple mechanic. It's a lot of fun because you can place these and take them off, and they come in and out of play. And I've got some event cards here. It's not a card-driven game. You do have cards to enhance your actions. So, for example, this one's a flip the enemy, or flip any active command marker, enemy or otherwise, over. So I could flip it over to the Soviets to a 1, knowing that when the Soviet player activates and gives them an order, they're going to be moving their pawn at the top of the game there back over towards me +1, right? And both the event cards, which definitely, like I said, it's not a card-driven game by any stretch of the imagination. They just enhance. But these mission command counters, I felt, again, very unique. They make you go through that decision process at every turn, and again, a really simple mechanic, very straightforward. So in conclusion, what I love about this game, there's tons of content. There's a massive stack of missions. There's tons of counters for the German and the Soviet. Some great armor in there. Tanks, infantry, heavy machine guns, support weapons, transports. Just the volume of content's awesome. The components are great, typical GMT quality. I love the visual styling of the game, really appeals to me. All the mechanics are super engaging and compelling. They really make you think as the commander about the actions that you want to take, the risk reward of all those actions, and how you best want to plan and carry out those orders. It's incredibly, for me, it was an incredibly compelling system, and I find it very hard to fault. I would say maybe it looks a little bit more intimidating than it is, because some of those mechanics are quite unique. They take a little time to get your head around, but once you understand the system, you can play it plays effortlessly, and it's quite a moddable system as well. So I've introduced tons of house rules into this game, create my own scenarios, because you get so much content in terms of the maps and the counters. Sometimes I've just wanted a game to play in an hour. created a little scenario on one of the smaller, maps, put some counters down, and played that way, and it's been great fun, really great. So huge amounts of content, great compelling mechanics, very unique, compelling mechanics, but that really make you think. And like I said, they really focus in on that decision-making process, which it's one of the things I love about the best war games that I play, is those decisions I'm faced, and there is no easy decision to make. You're making decisions at the cost of other things. That's what I love about this game. Incredibly well researched, very rich in its historical reference, which for me is super important, and I absolutely love that. Is there anything I could say negative about the game? There isn't, to be honest with you. I think this is one, if I think back, I've had this game a long time. I've played all the scenarios multiple times and thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish there were more games in the series. That's probably the only thing I would say. This is obviously Eastern Front, the expansion. Battle for Kharkov is also the Eastern Front. So I wish there were more. I wish there was more content. I wish there were more games in the series. Hopefully there will be in the future. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant system. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Can't recommend it enough. Be patient with it when you first get it. Watch some YouTube tutorials. Get some counters out. Go through the rulebook. Understand that matrix system. Once you have it in your head, you kind of go, ta-da, I got it, right? It's super compelling, so stick with it. This is a brilliant, wonderful game. It deserves a lot more attention than it gets sometimes, I feel. Though interestingly, whenever I talk to someone about this, and everyone will say something, oh, I love fighting formations, so yeah, highly recommended. As I've said, of all the platoon level type of games that there are, so I'm not comparing this to squad based level games. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's a platoon scale game. I know there are squads in it. This is a platoon level scale game. This is one of my favourites. I've played this a huge amount and thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.